Hi, Simran.
Hi, how are you?
Very good. How are you?
I'm great. It's great to see you.
Yeah, great to see you. Since we met in New York City.
Yes. It was nice to see you there. It's good to see you again now.
Yeah. So we are very honored to have you as a guest to this podcast. So this program is in the Musashino University's project, Comfort Tree Village project, which is celebrating 100 years anniversary from its foundation, and the core, the spirit of Musashino University is Buddha Dharma, and now 100 years later from its foundation, we are again looking for the context how the Buddha Dharma could be relevant to today's world, and how it could contribute to solve the many issues in the world. So we think you have great inspiration and insights on this topic.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So let's start from asking you with this question about ancestor. Who comes to your mind when you hear our word ancestor?
That's a great question. I would actually think immediately of somebody who I don't think is a relative or a blood relative, but he's a wisdom relative. And that is, in the way that a Buddhist might think of Buddha as the founder of the Buddha and the giver of the Buddha Dharma. In my tradition, the figure is Guru Nanak, who I think of as, in some ways, as my earliest ancestor. And I think the reason that I think so much about him as an ancestor is the wisdom that he gives us, that I take from him. I am trying to apply every day in my life, and trying to think about how did he live, what did he learn, what did he teach, and how could I honor him and live by his teachings. And so, I've never thought about it this way, but when you say who is the first ancestor that comes to your mind, it would be him.
Yeah, so it's very nice to hear that. And so you first mentioned the wisdom ancestor rather than blood relative ancestor. Yeah,
it's interesting. I wonder if in my family, I know a few generations, going, my grandparents, my great grandparents, my great great grandparents. I don't know much farther than that, and so, and I feel very grateful to them. I feel very thankful to them. I wouldn't have the life that I have now without them. And it's very interesting to me. Our family is very connected, and so their offspring and their generations are in some ways they feel connected to the ancestors, but it doesn't feel like it goes as far back as Guru Nanak, as the wisdom, and also I think the wisdom. I think about those ancestors, the blood ancestors, from time to time, but not every day. The wisdom feels more important on an everyday basis.
Yeah. So the your important ancestor Guru Nanak.
Yes.
So could you tell me about what I can learn from his wisdom as a person living
Yeah.
today?
Sure. It's a great question. I've been thinking about this recently in a little bit of a different way than I usually do. So Guru Nanak lived about 500 years ago in Punjab, in North India, and one of his legacies of wisdom is his writings. He writes beautiful poetry and music. And in his poetry, the very first composition that he gives us, in the very first portion of it, he asks us a question. He says, "Give sachiara hoye, give kure tutte pal." This means, how can I become truth? How do I break the wall of falsehood? And so this is his first question. And in some ways, it seems to me that the wisdom here, the teaching here, is that this is the objective. This is the goal for the human being, is to find truth and to break the falsehood of our lives. And then he gives a very interesting answer, and this is why I've been thinking about it for so long. He says, "Hukum rajai chalna nanak likhya na." This means learning to live in the way of the world. This is the answer to the question. And in some ways, I think all of his wisdom that follows in his compositions, in his music, in his life, in the people who follow him as gurus, as teachers, it's very much focused on answering that question. What does it look like to live in the way of the world, where we don't have too much ego and think the world revolves around us, and recognize that we are not just individuals living our own lives, but there's a bigger world around us that we are connected to. These are the kinds of things that I learned from Guru Nanak's teachings. And I'll tell you, it feels like a breath of fresh air sometimes, because it's so different from how American culture is, where I live, where everybody is always thinking about, themselves and what makes them happy, and not really thinking about what does long-term awakening look like? What is it? What does service to other people look like? What does compassion look like? These are not the primary questions. And so to see these questions from Guru Nanak's life and his teachings, and to have an opportunity to think about them and to try and live by them, I find that to be the most valuable part of his wisdom.
Yeah, so it sounds like the wisdom that we, the people living today, really need, right? With full of fake news and so angry feeling, and so you have been working on making a voice, from the marginalized community, right? So, in terms of the size of community in religion, so in the United States, the country where you live now, the Sikh community is, compared to other religious community, it's small, right? and
Right.
I
Right.
think Buddhism as well. So, what do you think about how those marginalized minority religious groups can collaborate together?
Yeah, it's a great question because in a place like the U.S. where I live, being a minority religion it can be a difficult thing because people don't always understand you. They don't create opportunities for growth or even for connection. And life can be very difficult, as we've seen for Buddhists and Hindus and Jews and Muslims in this country. And so one of the things I've learned, I'm a scholar of history is my training. I really love understanding history, and one of the things we learn here in the U.S., but also all over the world, is that when people can find a sharedness in their experience, even across difference, that creates a strong enough bond to make social change. And the difficulty is, in times like now, it feels so hard to say we have something in common, because you might be Buddhist and you might be Japanese and I might be Sikh and living in the United States. And so we can look at each other and say we have nothing in common. But I think what's really powerful is when we start to talk about our values, what feels important to us, when we talk about what motivates us and why being a person of faith matters, or why serving other people matters, right? These kinds of things can really help us create a sense of compassion, of empathy, and then say, okay, let's create a better life together for all of us. And I think that that to me is the promise, the potential for change if we can really connect.
Yeah. So just as you said, I also have been looking for something in common across all religions and faith. One thing I found finally is asking this question: how can we become good ancestors for the future generation?
Yes.
So regardless of your religion, so of course there are some religion that believes the afterlife or reincarnation or going to heaven, whatever. So in terms of destination, so it's not maybe it's not easy to find the common destination, but as a human being, regardless of religion, we will die at the end of our life. So in this point, we can all agree. And in other words, we will become ancestors for the future generation, right? So if I ask you this question, how can we become good ancestors for the future generation? What kind of answer you come up with?
It's a great question, because when I first met you, and you shared this idea with me, I hadn't really heard it before. Usually we think about maybe the ancestors that came before us, maybe our parents or our grandparents, and then we think about what makes me a good sibling or a parent or maybe even a grandparent, but I haven't thought so much about the long-term legacy for me. And there's a line from, or a shabad, the composition in Sikh scripture, that I think about when it comes to ancestors. And when we first met, since we first met, I've been thinking about it. It's by the third Guru Amar Das, and he starts by saying, "Babaniya kahaniya put saput karein." The stories of one's ancestors transform children into great children. And so there's something really interesting here about this idea that just by being connected, there is something that can change. And the composition goes on and shares some other insights and ideas. But what I'm really drawing from it is, if we as children can be receptive to the wisdom that comes from our ancestors. They've lived their lives and endured their own challenges and learned so much along the way. We can receive from them, and we can have better lives because it can be so much easier for us. And if I take your question and say, what would make me a good ancestor? Part of the answer is what I'm seeing here. It is, if I can collect my own wisdom through my experiences, receive the wisdom from before me, collect my own from my life, but also make sure to share it with the world, to make sure that I'm not just gathering it for myself and being selfish, but really saying these ideas that I'm learning can also benefit other people and future generations. I think that, to me, is a really important part of being a good ancestor. Of learning, of sharing, and of passing on and transmitting wisdom to future generations for the betterment of their lives too.
Yeah, beautiful. And so to become an ancestor, so to become a wisdom ancestor for the future, wisdom descendants. So you wrote a couple of books, right? Which could be a great way to, pass your experience and thought for the future wisdom descendants. So you already have a great gift and will. Do you have any plan to write another titles in the future?
Yes. Thank you for asking. Yes, actually, I love that you're asking, because it's when you're saying what can make you a good ancestor. For me, I think part of my answer is by writing books that will last over generations. And so I've been trying very hard to do that. And so I am writing more books for children, books for adults, books for scholars and historians. But my idea is, it shouldn't just be everyday information, or just, silly stories for children, which I love. I love silly stories. But they should also have wisdom inside of them too. How do we make our children more wise? How do we make them more compassionate? Those are very important questions for me. And so I have a children's book coming out this upcoming spring. It's a story about migration and finding a new home. I'm working on a new book for adults about Sikh wisdom, and hopefully trying to think about everyday experiences for our lives. And then finally, I'm hoping to write a book about Guru Nanak, who I mentioned I would see as my first ancestor, and so I'm excited to write that book eventually as well.
Yeah, sounds great. So looking forward to reading it.
Thank you.
In the future. So one more thing. I like to ask you is, to become good ancestor. We could leave some good legacy or gift for the people to be born, but also we can stop to do something maybe bad for the future generation. So we can leave some leave legacy by giving a gift, but also we can leave some legacy not to pass or carry to the next generation. So what do you think is something we should stop in our generation?
Well, that is a great question. Also, because when I think about legacy, I think about what we should do as opposed to what we should not do. But I love that way of thinking about it. I think maybe I can say it in a way that, well, let me say it this way. I think one of the biggest problems of our world today is how much we dehumanize one another. And much of that, as with many of our problems, comes from ego. We think we are better than other people. We think we have the right answers and they must be wrong. We think that other people don't know what the truth is. They don't know what the right thing to do is. And it's just, as I look at our world falling apart and all the anger and the hurt and the frustration, if we could learn to get beyond that a little bit, even just a little bit, I think we could go a long way. Addressing the human ego is a larger issue. It's something that is at the core of our challenge as beings, and something that we each have to take our own journey to resolve. But I think if we could even just understand a small portion of it and say, in our cultures, we are no longer going to accept the idea that I am better than you or that you are better than me. That's something that I would love for us to get rid of. It could be on the basis of religious beliefs and ideologies. It can be political. It could be nation state, and saying, our culture is better than yours, or our country is better than yours. But I think if we could dispose of that way of living, we could all be so much happier.
So in terms of the wisdom to, wisdom how we can coexist each other on this, planet, I think we there are a lot of things we can learn from the philosophy of Sikh, which appreciates the diversity, right? Yeah. So so as long as I learned about Sikh. So the Sikh is very open and accept the existence of diverse other religions and philosophies.
Yes, and similar to what I was saying earlier, my understanding of Sikh philosophy is that there is no exclusive claim to truth. We do not believe we are the only ones who can understand enlightenment or spiritual progress, that everyone can do it in their different ways. But what's interesting is there is one common thread that our philosophy teaches, and that is one can only achieve it if they can find oneness and love within their lives. And so it is very interesting to look at a world where people are not loving one another and hurting one another, and so many people are suffering. It's very interesting to look at that and to realize that even this is a revolutionary idea, as simple and even as obvious as it might seem. It's not how everyone lives. It's not how most people live, and so it's very important to try and practice it.
So you mentioned earlier. You mentioned dehumanization, right? So from your perspective, what's the meaning of humanity? In my observation, I think we are living in the age where the meaning of humanity is changing. So the humanity used to mean that human being is different from animals, plants. Human being is special. So that's why we have logos, rational thinking. We can think. We can think of thinking even. So we can have philosophy. So because of that, we are very special, different from animals. But now we are living in the age of AI, generative AI, where the word of logos is going to be dominated by AI finally. So we need to differentiate ourselves from AI now, and we are coming to find that how we can be different from AI is because in the first place we are animals. So so it means because we have body, we have feeling, we need to have a space, we need to have foods and habitat. So we used to differentiate ourselves from animal, but now we are trying to differentiate ourselves from AI by recognizing we are the animals in the first place. So so I think the meaning of humanity is changing now. So given this context in the age of AI, so how do you see the meaning of humanity?
Yeah, it's such a good observation, because I think if we look at how people are talking about AI right now, people are excited, and I understand it's a big technological change, and it will change the way that we live. But I don't think that so much of what people are saying can be substituted or exchanged about human life is actually possible, because at the end of the day, we are human beings, as humanity, we are human beings who are still and forever will be so much more complex than what technology can offer.
Right.
And if you think about, if you minimize in the way that the Western world historically has done, if you minimize human existence to human intelligence, then yes, maybe you can replicate into human intelligence and you can actually grow it, and that feels very possible. But that's only one dimension of what it means to be human, and there's so much more to who we are. And in some ways, and in the ways that your tradition and my tradition teach us, the intellect is not even the most important part of what it means to be human. And so I hear you on the changing definition of humanity. And on the one hand, I'm worried that people are deluded into thinking that what they define as human isn't actually reflective of how they live their own lives. But on the other hand, I'm not so worried. I'm not as worried as many other people who think AI will replace us, because there's so much more to us that cannot be replicated, and so we will continue to have meaning and purpose within our lives that can't be taken away from us.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. So we human beings has a lot, much more, things other than the logical intelligence part, right? And
Yes.
and I appreciate that. So your wisdom ancestor, the guru, conveyed his philosophy through the song. Yeah, so the very the in the art form, right? So yeah.
It is interesting to think about, because I'm a professor of religion, and typically when you talk to students about religion, they want to know what are the ideas. And even when we talk about Buddhist history, for example, my students in the classroom want to know, well, what is the philosophy, what are the ideas? And those things are very important to a community and to a believer, but they're not the only things. And in our tradition, if you strip down to the ideas, then you miss on the beauty of the song or the poetry, and even other forms of art that are coming in all throughout the tradition. So I'm so glad you noticed that, because it's an important part of who we are, and how I see our tradition, but also it's one that people often don't notice, because they're just looking for the beliefs or the ideas.
Yeah, great. The one last thing, which might be a little bit, provocative in some sense, is so the Sikh people has a history to serve in a military, right? And in this program by Musashino University, we have a lot of dialogues inviting scholars and thought leaders from many diverse backgrounds. And we talked about ethics and peace, particularly the ethics in war. So we discussed. We had a good conversation with David Rodin, specializing the just war theory, which was developed in the Christian and Western philosophy. So, is there any philosophy or wisdom around in Sikh community how you perceive the war and how you consider the war and conflict or serving as a in a military force, or yes. So is there any philosophy around that in Sikh community?
Yeah, it is a good question, and there is a philosophy around it, similar to the idea of just war theory, and the ethics of war. The teaching in our tradition is that every person, every spiritual being, should be a saint, and should also be a warrior. And in some ways, I mean, maybe a way to understand this is if I just explain the idea of why we serve, and why that's so important, and why it's so important to be active in the world socially, as a warrior. And it is, our belief is that if you really love the people around you, if you see everyone as interconnected and equally divine, then your natural impulse is to reduce their suffering, and to bring them more happiness in their lives. And that's why service is so important for us in our tradition. And that service can take many different forms. I can serve you by bringing you water, or I can serve you by being a teacher, or I can serve you by standing up for you when your rights are being violated. And in our tradition, that standing up can even use force sometimes, and that's what we learn. But the teaching is that the force is only to be used in defense, not offensively, and also that the motivation, just like with any other service, can and should still be love. And if your heart is not in the right place, and you try and serve, whether it's giving someone water or fighting in a battle, then if your heart's not in the right place, then the results, whatever you do, will not be fruitful. But if you are doing your service out of love, then whatever it is that you do, it will be fruitful. And so that's the teaching in our tradition around political activism and social justice and service, and even serving in military.
Wow. Yeah, thank you for sharing the profound thought. So it is important for Sikh people to keep right consciousness, whatever whatever way you serve for others, your important people.
Exactly.
All right. Yeah, thank you for coming to this podcast. I really appreciate your contribution to this program. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. This was a great conversation, and you asked wonderful questions. I really enjoyed it.
All right. Thank you so much, and see you maybe in New York again.
I hope so. Or maybe in Kyoto one of these days too.
Yeah.
So.
All right.
All right. Great to see you. Have a good day. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.